Thank you so much for staying with us right here on Entrepreneur Speech. My good name is Alice Wanjera Mwangi, and joining us again on our studio is Mr. Ian Washira. Thank you so much, Ian, for staying with us also.
Thank you.
So I want us now to really understand, do tenants have the right to know their landlord's identity?
Well, I don't think that's not a right.
Okay.
That's not a right, because as long as the landlord, through the agent, is satisfying the conditions or the obligations that they have, then the identity of the landlord is not material to that tenancy. The most important thing is you pay rent, and the landlord is giving you a proper premises with quiet possession that is enjoyable, and also the facilities you're enjoying, for instance, water, common premises are clean and in perfect condition, then your landlord's identity is not material to that tenancy. Yes.
Sawa sawa. All right. Now, do tenants have the right now to be refunded back their deposits? Because this is another case that we've had, each and every single time. For example, if a tenant wants to relocate to another place, sometimes the landlord will suggest maybe you just stay for a month so that rent can compensate you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how do we go about that?
Now, deposits are quite sensitive topics because they go on a case-to-case basis, depending on the agreement that you had with the landlord, especially at the inception of the tenancy relationship. Now, it is important as you get into this tenancy, make sure that these issues are streamlined in the contract. You have a provision that addresses the issue of deposit, how much is payable as goodwill or deposit, and how much is refundable at the end of the tenancy. But one thing is very constant, the state in which you leave the premises. Because as much as the landlord has the obligation to make sure that the premises is habitable, the tenant has the right or the obligation to make sure that the fixtures, that the paint are in perfect condition. Well, of course, with the exception of fair wear and tear. The premises, you should leave the premises at least in a habitable situation. You should not be leaving cupboards hanging, things are falling apart. It's as if there was a tornado in the premises. So, as much as you want this deposit paid back to you, you should also give back. You should surrender this tenancy, the premises being in perfect condition, with the exception of wear and tear. So it's a very sensitive area. It's a very sensitive topic, but it goes on a case-to-case basis. So I usually insist on having that provision addressed in the agreement for tenancy or in your lease agreement, so that when you're parting ways, you also have clear structures and a clear system of vacating that premises. Just within reasonable time. Reasonable, it depends. Also, you find situations where the tenancy is a periodic tenancy. For instance, it's on a month-to-month basis, others quarterly, others yearly. So it also depends on the amount of time it takes between rents. So if it takes 1 year between rent, then 6 months is reasonable. If it takes a month, then you give it about a month or two for the deposit to be payable. Now, there's usually this principle of a reasonable man on an omnibus. London. What would that man think? What would that man do in such a scenario? So once you apply that, then as a landlord, use common sense. If it takes more than a month, if it was a month-to-month payment of rent or a weekly payment of rent, then it's too long and this person can take you to court. So it also depends on the amount of rent that was paid. Sorry, not the amount, but the period of rent.
So what is the action taken in a case where now the tenant becomes so difficult, they don't want to pay? Maybe, for instance, they have already vacated the premises. So what is the action of now collecting the arrears?
Well, the landlord has quite a number of remedies, especially for, I don't want to call them stubborn tenants, but those who don't comply. So the first remedy, they may sue. They may sue for special damages. Now, special damages are damages that you may quantify. You state that you charge rent for this month.
Okay.
You produce a contract, or you produce receipts for payments done in previous tenancies or for other tenants. Produce them in court and state these are the general damages payable. Sorry, the special damages. Then you have general damages. You may ask for that. You may have attachment. You may attach some of the property if you have an order in favor of you for such special damages. Then we have the distress for rent. Distress for rent is provided by the Distress for Rent Act, which gives the landlord the right to distress goods of the tenant. So, for instance, if I have 1,000 shoes in my house and I haven't paid rent, my landlord can come and take these shoes, distress, to make sure that the rent is recovered through that. But even as we distress for rent, it is important for a landlord to realize that there's a process that ought to be followed. Now, for distress, you need to give a notice. You need to tell the tenant that I have this and this and this that belongs to you, and within 14 days, if you do not pay rent, I'm going to sell through an auctioneer and recover my rent. Now, the tenant will come back to you or may fail. Now, when they come back, they may ask for valuation. Value the goods, then you may sell through public auction, or you may sell the property. I do not object to that. So if they do not object, they may sell within a shorter period than the 14 days. But if they are silent, wait for the 14 days to lapse, then you proceed with the distress. So these are the few remedies that the landlord may have in terms of recovering rent for that particular premises. But it is important to note that if you fail to follow a particular procedure, then this distress shall be declared void, right? Because it should also give the tenant an opportunity to respond or to give you an alternative. They may give you a security. I do not wish my shoes to be sold. Let me give you my shirts, right? You sell my shirts, don't sell my shoes. So there's that thin line that a landlord should maintain between realizing their rights and infringing on the tenant's rights. Then there are particular goods that cannot be distressed under the Act. So you have, for instance, crops that are attached to the ground. If you have crops that maybe had been harvested, that you can distress. Then you have animals. If I have my kachiwawa in my apartment, you can't come and sell for rent. Then we have tools of trade, but the Act caps it at 100 shillings. So if my tools of trade exceed 100 pop, then you may distress that. My clothing, you cannot distress my clothing. My attire, you cannot distress that. Beddings, there are quite a number of items that you cannot distress, but you can only distress what we call fixed in a chattel. These are movable goods, so you cannot distress land. So if you hear that I have a kashamba in Kamulu, can't go and attach it, then you claim that you're distressing it. It's only for chattels, which are movable properties. So cutlery is not allowed. For instance, stoves, you cannot distress that. You can distress my television, my subwoofer, whatever I put in my house, but there are particular items that you cannot distress. So once you realize this, you're able to strike a very delicate balance between the two, realizing your rights and infringing on the tenant's rights.
All right.
Yes.
So in a case where now the court has now given you the go-ahead to seize, the tenant's good, and you sell all these goods, but the amount that is, acquired from all those do not compensate the rent arrears, what is the next step?
Well, that is still a debt. Now the arrears or whatever is left after you've sold, if they're in excess, you have the obligation to refund to the tenant. But if there's still some amount that is pending, it's still recoverable as a debt. So that's a debt to you.
Okay.
Yes, it will be treated as a debt.
Okay. Do we have some limitation period to collect your arrears?
No, there's no limitation.
Okay.
There's no limitation. And one good thing is that even as you ask for special damages, if you wish to go to court, you may ask for interest as long as this rent is in arrears. So it will be accruing interest by the day or by the month, depending on the kind of judgment you get or the ruling that you get from the judge. So you may ask for interest, so it will be earning you interest as a landlord on this particular rent. So as long as the tenant is not paying, you're also earning. So this money doesn't go to waste.
So I want to take you back to where we were talking about the rights of tenants, and of
Yes.
course you had said that you're going to mention some of
Yes.
them that I quite didn't mention. But I also understand that some landlords do not accept people from different religion. That is discrimination.
Yes.
Just because they're married or because they're single or something. Tribalism also. So in such case, how do we go about it?
Well, it's very unfortunate that we experience such as tenants, where you have a landlord discriminating against you, which is very unconstitutional. But then again, a landlord has the right to admit. They may decide that they'll tell you that the premises is fully occupied. But you can't move to court, or you can't move to a tribunal requesting that the landlord, or requesting for orders that the landlord admits you as a tenant, because they have the right to admit, but they do not have the right to expunge you from the tenancy. There are quite particular procedures when it comes to that. But if the landlord discriminates against me as a tenant and decides that for whatever reason that they are going to evict me without following the due process, then I may institute proceedings against the landlord for that particular misaction or that particular omission. Yes.
All right. So do we have any other rights apart from what we have mentioned? What are some of the rights that tenants are not renewing?
Well, I'll start with the most obvious one, the right to quiet possession. So you have the right to occupy this property without any influence or any interruption from the landlord, any interruption from court and other tenants. You as a tenant, you have the right to a clean environment. So that is also provided for under the Constitution. So the landlord needs to make sure that this property is well taken care of. You don't have very long grass growing on the property. You don't have waste being disposed anyhowly on the premises. Then as a tenant, you have the right to a habitable environment. And this also applies to the obligations of a landlord. So as I mentioned, the rights of a tenant, they automatically become the obligations of a landlord. Then as a tenant, you have the right to request for rent book. There's a rent book that is usually maintained by a landlord. So this rent book will describe your relationship, will describe the tenancy, the rent payable, how much has been paid, and has to be authenticated by this particular landlord or their agents. And failure to do so, failure to produce this rent book is a criminal offense under the Business Premises Act. The Business Premises, the act that refers to the business premises tenancies. Then as a tenant, you have the right to I don't know where quiet possession. Did I mention quiet possession? Now this quiet possession can be interrupted in particular circumstances. Circumstances where there need to be inspection of the premises. The landlord needs to ensure that the fittings are in order, the paint is good, and also to make amendments or even to rectify issues that may have arisen within the tenancy. So breakage, probably drainage issues. Now the landlord may infringe on that quiet possession, but it is very limited. It is for a very limited duration. Then you have situations where the tenant, an adjacent tenant, is playing very loud music. I know.
Okay.
I know we experience this time and again. So the landlord, to ensure that you enjoy this quiet possession, has the right to evict this other tenant if they fail to honor the notice given to them. So a warning may be given to this tenant to be quiet because we have other tenants on the premises and we need this place to be serene. And if they fail to oblige to that, then the landlord may terminate the tenancy through issuance of a notice. So basically those are some of the rights that are enjoyed by the tenants and ought to be enjoyed by the tenant. And the most important of it all is the right to receive notices, whether it's for increment of rent, whether it's for change of terms of the tenancy, because you may find a situation where the tenancy allowed for sub-tenancy on the premises. So as a tenant of a 3-bedroomed house, you may decide that you want 2 more roommates. You have 2 more roommates in your premises. The contract may allow for that. But the landlord may decide they want to revert to seeking consent. Now the tenant has to seek consent before they bring in more tenants. So for these changes, the tenant needs to receive a notice, sufficient notice, a notice that addresses particulars of such changes. Then notice to receive termination, right to receive termination notices under the Act. These are the most important rights that a tenant needs to realize. Now on the other end, we have the landlord, whose obligations are tantamount to the rights of the tenant. So whatever the tenant enjoys are the obligations of the landlord. Now the rights of a landlord, of course, to collect rent. They need to enjoy the premises. It's their property at the end of the day. 2, they have the right to vary the terms of the premises, but it should be done with due regard to procedure, and they should not be unreasonable. So those are the 2 main rights of the landlord.
All right. Wow, thank you so much for giving us that insight. I know someone is learning, and also I am learning quite much on that. I know time is not on the side, but I want you to touch on one right that I feel like we need to, just in a nutshell. What about time? Because sometimes when you rent a house, and for example you work, like you have a night shift or something, and you are supposed to report back, like at 2, and some landlords want you to be there by 9. How do we work on that?
Well, now that's as initially stated, tenancies are usually treated on a case-to-case basis. So you have an arrangement with your landlord stating that within my premises as a landlord, I do not admit people past 10 or past 11, and these are the rules here. So these are the terms that come with the tenancy. If you wish to engage me as a landlord in that capacity, then you need to oblige to this particular rights or these particular provisions that are provided. Now, if you fail, there are repercussions, and which is I won't admit you to the premises. So this is a case-to-case basis that cannot be addressed by law. If a tenant is not satisfied with the terms that the landlord is offering, then they have the rights to seek some other premises that are in line with their needs. So yeah, it's a case-to-case basis. It's a contractual issue more than a legal one. Yes.
What I'm understanding from all this, actually, you need to have an agreement.
It's true.
An agreement is the one that is going to solve all the problems.
It protects you and it provides for clear obligations. Because if you rely on the Act, because there are some rights that we are not aware of.
Yeah, sure.
So if you rely on spoken word, as a tenant or as a landlord, I can go back on my word and decide that we did not agree on this, and I have no reference to support my assertions when I'm being or when my rights are being infringed. So it is very important to have a contract, especially for tenancies and any other engagement, to outline the obligations of each parties and the rights of each parties.
Wow.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Before we wind up, I want you to take this opportunity and tell people what you do at Optivia as a legal counsel.
Yes,
and of course what you do at PMC. Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Ian Washira again. I'm legal counsel at Optivia Limited, and I also advise PMC on various issues to do with tenancies. If you wish to engage us more, you can find us on 0700-305-305, or you can visit us on our website www.optivan.co.ke. Thank you for joining us, and I'm happy to be here.
All right.
Thank you.
What are some of your social media handles? Do you have social media handles, your number?
Yes. For Optivia, we have Optivia Limited on Instagram. We have Optivia Limited on YouTube. We have Optivia Limited on TikTok. Then we have PMC Limited on all platforms, the platforms I've just mentioned. PMC Leasing Limited. You can find us on all social media platforms.
Okay, do you have a number, perhaps?
Yes, 0700-305-305. Sorry, I think it's 350. 0700-350-350. Yes, you can find us on our phone.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much. But I was quite wondering, what is the relationship between PMC and Optivia?
Well, we are sister companies.
Okay.
We usually engage in different transactions. We share a lot in terms of personnel. So we have a rich base in terms of professionals. We borrow professionals from different platforms, from PMC, from Optivia. We have other SBUs. We have GMC. We have Panerotis. We have Eagle Peak. So we have quite a wide range of professionals, and we can cater for all the needs that you may be having. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And
so
before
much.
I really wind up now, you see, our background today is all about maintaining peace in our country. Of course, this is an election,
It's
period.
true.
Of course, it's just one day.
It's true.
And we are preaching actually the the message of peace.
Exactly.
And I'm quite wondering about landlords. How prepared are they? Last time in 2007 when we had chaos,
Right.
there were some people who are going to premises
Exactly.
without even having to pay. So
It's
how
true.
prepared are they right now?
Well, they ought to be prepared in terms of making sure that the premises are secure, even for the sake of other tenants. Because as a landlord, your obligation is to make sure the premises are also secure for quiet possession to be achieved. So landlords should be very keen on ensuring that tenants are peacefully connecting amongst each other. Even beyond elections, we have arrangements. We are neighbors. We are friends. We are landlords. We are tenants. So at the end of the day, the message should be peace. Let us maintain peace within ourselves. Let's vote in peace. Whoever wins, whoever loses, the country is together. The country has to move on. We have lives. We have friends. So we need to go back to our lives. And that's the most important thing that landlords should take note of. And I also feel like landlords should be very neutral when it comes to political matters, because you have different tenants with different political preferences. So it is important for a landlord to play middle ground so that you don't seem to side with one side of your tenants to the expense of the other. And that's where even discrimination comes in. So as a landlord, you need to be very neutral so as to achieve a harmony within your premises.
All right.
Yes.
One message to Kenyans to maintain peace. Do you have?
Yes, most definitely maintain peace, vote wisely, vote for peace at the end of the day, and make sure that you remember that your neighbor is your brother, your neighbor is your sister.
All right. Thank you so much for
thank
joining
you.
us today and sharing your insight and helping us navigate through, these matters
Thank
of
you.
tenants and landlords laws in Kenya. And I hope that our viewers have learned 1 or 2, 3 things. I hope this is not the last time we're having you on our studio.
I look forward to more engagements in the future.
All right.
Yes, I look forward to
Asante
more.
sana. On our side, we
Thank
say during and after election, we're maintaining peace. On our side, actually, right now, tunasema hakuna matata. Make sure you stay safe and you love your brother, just as the Bible requires us. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Till next time, have yourself a lovely Monday ahead and maintain peace. Till
Thank
next
you.
time. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.